In a small town where the dead were buried with honor, people began to notice something strange. Whenever someone died, one man always arrived first. He cried louder than the grieving family. He helped carry the coffin. He even dug the grave himself. The villagers believed he was the most compassionate man among them. But what they did not know was that every night after the funerals, that same man returned to the graveyard, not to pray, not to mourn, but to rob the dead. And his name was Jaguda. In a quiet town called Ajodi, surrounded by tall trees and dusty red roads, life moved slowly and peacefully. The people knew one another like family, and in times of joy or sorrow, they always stood together. But there was one moment when the entire town moved as one, when someone died. In that town, funerals were never quiet affairs. Women wailed loudly, men stood in solemn silence, and elders prayed for the soul of the departed. People came from neighboring compounds to pay their last respects. It was believed that the dead must be buried with dignity, because the way a person left the world mattered just as much as how they lived in it. And at every funeral, without fail, there was one man who always arrived before everyone else. His name was Jaguda. No one could remember a burial where Jaguda was absent. It did not matter if the deceased was rich or poor, young or old. Jaguda would appear, dressed in dark clothing, his face heavy with sorrow. But what truly set Jaguda apart was not just his presence, it was the way he mourned. When the family of the dead wept, Jaguda wept even louder. When others wiped their tears quietly, Jaguda cried as if his own blood had been taken away. He beat his chest. He called the name of the dead repeatedly. Sometimes he even rolled on the ground in grief. Many people watched him with deep admiration. "Ah," some would whisper, "Jaguda has a truly compassionate heart." Others would shake their heads in amazement. Not many people mourn like this for others. But Jaguda did more than cry. Whenever it was time to dig the grave, he stepped forward before anyone else. "Leave it to me," he would say humbly. "No family should carry this burden alone." Under the hot sun, Jaguda dug tirelessly, sweat pouring down his face as he carved deep into the earth. And when people tried to reward him for his help, he always refused. "No," Jaguda would say softly, "I do this for the sake of the dead." Because of this, the people came to respect him greatly. Some even began to say that Jaguda was the most compassionate man in the entire town. But what the people did not know was that Jaguda had a secret that only came alive when the town slept. As the burial ceremony slowly came to an end, people began to leave the graveyard in small groups. The crying had quieted, and the heavy silence that always followed a burial settled over the place. Jaguda remained behind for a moment, patting down the fresh soil carefully, making sure the grave looked neat and respectful. A few steps away, two men watched him from under the shade of a large tree. One of them, a Jokba, folded his arms and nodded towards Jaguda. "Look at that man," he said quietly. "He has not rested since morning." Beside him stood Balogun, an older villager who leaned on a walking stick. He watched Jaguda closely as the man wiped sweat from his face. Balogun sighed. "You know," he said slowly, "I have lived in this village for more than 40 years, and I cannot remember a single burial where Jaguda was absent." Ijogba chuckled softly. "It is true. Even when the dead person is from the far end of the town, Jaguda somehow hears about it before everyone else." They both watched Jaguda pick up his shovel and place it over his shoulder. A few grieving family members approached him, thanking him for digging the grave.
As usual, Jaguda shook his head and refused the small money they tried to give him. No, he said gently. Keep it. Use it to take care of yourselves. The family members looked at him with gratitude. May God bless your kind heart, Jaguda, one of them said. Jaguda only bowed his head humbly before walking away from the graveyard. Ijogba watched him disappear down the dusty path. Then he shook his head in admiration. That man, his heart is different from the rest of us. But Balogun did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the path where Jaguda had vanished. After a moment, he spoke in a low voice. Perhaps. Ijogba looked at him. Perhaps, he asked. Balogun adjusted his walking stick and sighed. I have learned something in this life, my friend, he said quietly. Sometimes, when a person tries too hard to appear good, he paused for a moment. It is wise to ask why. Ijogba frowned slightly, confused. But before he could say anything more, Balogun turned and slowly began walking back towards the town. Behind them, the graveyard stood silent, and beneath the freshly packed soil, the dead rested peacefully, unaware that someone would soon return to disturb their sleep. That night, when the people slept peacefully, above the town, the moon hung quietly in the sky, casting a pale silver light over the land. Not too far from the road leading to farms stood the town graveyard. At night, very few people dared to go near that place.
The tall grass moved slowly with the wind, and the crooked wooden markers that stood above the graves cast long shadows across the ground. Most people in that town believed that once the sun set, the spirits of the departed deserved to rest undisturbed. But on this night, someone was approaching the graveyard. A lone figure walked slowly along the narrow path. It was Jaguda. He moved carefully, glancing behind him from time to time to make sure no one had followed him. In his hand, he carried a small digging tool and a lantern whose dim flame flickered with each step. When he reached the center of the graveyard, Jaguda stopped for a moment and listened. Nothing, only the wind. Satisfied that he was alone, he walked toward the fresh grave he had dug earlier that day. The soil was still soft, making the walk easier. Jaguda placed the lantern on the ground and began to dig. It was clear he knew exactly where the coffin rested because he himself had placed it there earlier. Within a short time, the wooden surface of the coffin began to appear beneath the loose soil. Jaguda brushed the remaining dirt away with his hands. Then he looked around again to make sure the graveyard was still empty. The lantern light trembled slightly as the night breeze passed. He did not remove the coffin from the grave. That would have required far more strength and would leave obvious signs behind. Instead, he opened only the coffin lid, just enough. The faint smell of fresh wood and burial cloth drifted into the cold air. Inside lay the body that had been buried only hours before, but Jaguda did not hesitate. With careful fingers, he reached toward the lifeless hands of the dead and slowly removed the rings that had been buried with the body. Then he searched the neck and removed a necklace that glittered faintly in the lantern light. His face, which had earlier been filled with tears and sorrow at the funeral, now looked completely different. Cold, focused, almost satisfied. After collecting the valuables, Jaguda gently lowered the coffin lid back into place. Then he pushed the loose soil back, patting it down carefully so that the grave looked untouched. Anyone passing by the next day would see nothing unusual. Within minutes, the grave looked exactly the same as it had after the burial. Jaguda picked up his lantern and looked once more across the silent graveyard.
Then, with the stolen jewelry hidden in his pockets, he quietly disappeared into the darkness. Behind him, the graveyard returned to its deep, uneasy silence. For weeks, Jaguda continued his strange routine. Whenever someone died, Jaguda appeared like a shadow that could not be avoided. He cried louder than the grieving family, offered to dig the grave, and stayed behind until the burial was complete. To the community people, he was a man full of compassion. But once darkness covered the land, Jaguda became something else entirely. On several nights, the faint glow of his lantern could be seen moving slowly among the graves. Jaguda had become very skilled at his secret work. Because he was the one who usually dug the graves, he knew exactly where the coffin rested beneath the soil. With careful digging, he exposed the coffin and opened it just enough to reach inside. He took whatever valuables had been buried with the dead: rings, necklaces, bracelets, small coins sometimes placed in the coffin according to old traditions. But Jaguda was also careful about something else. He never sold those items anywhere near the village. Every few weeks, Jaguda traveled far beyond the neighboring town to distant markets where no one knew him. There, among traders and strangers, Jaguda quietly exchanged the stolen items for money. No one asked questions, and Jaguda always returned to the town looking like the same humble man who mourned at every funeral. The people never suspected a thing. Until one night, when Jaguda opened a grave and found something unexpected. Inside the coffin lay the body of a wealthy elder who had been buried earlier that day. Jaguda had watched carefully during the burial and expected to find expensive jewelry. But when he opened the coffin and searched the body, his face tightened with disappointment. There was no gold chain, no rings. The family must have chosen not to bury valuables with the man. Jaguda frowned. After a moment, his eyes moved slowly again across the body. Then they stopped. The dead man had been buried wearing a clean white agbada, the ceremonial robe he had worn during important occasions in his lifetime. The cloth looked expensive. Jaguda hesitated only briefly. Carefully, he removed the robe from the body. Then he also removed the fine leather shoes from the man's feet. Satisfied that he had taken something of value, Jaguda closed the coffin again and covered the grave as usual. Within minutes, the grave looked exactly the same as it had after the burial.
Several weeks passed. Life continued as normal. The markets bustled with traders. Children ran through the dusty paths, and people prepared for a joyful occasion taking place that evening. There was a celebration in the town square. Men dressed in their finest clothing. Women wore colorful wrappers and head ties, and music filled the air as people gathered to enjoy the event. Among the crowd that evening was Jaguda, and for the first time in a long while, he was dressed differently. Flowing proudly over his shoulders was a beautiful white agbada. The cloth shone brightly under the evening light, and the embroidery on the front made it clear that the robe belonged to someone of importance. Many villagers admired the outfit as Jaguda walked among them. But across the gathering, one young man suddenly froze. His name was Babatunde, the son of the elder who had been buried weeks earlier. As his eyes settled on Jaguda, his heart began to pound. He stared again. Then again, there was no mistake. The white agbada Jaguda was wearing looked exactly like the one his father had been buried in. Babatunde's face slowly filled with confusion and disbelief. How? He whispered to himself. His father had been buried wearing that very robe and the same leather shoes. He had seen it with his own eyes.
Yet here was Jaguda, walking freely in the same cloth and shoes. Babatunde pushed his way through the crowd until he stood directly in front of him. Jaguda smiled politely, unaware of the storm that had begun to form. Babatunde pointed at the robe. "Where did you get this agbada?" he asked sharply. Jaguda paused, only for a brief second. Then he forced a calm smile. "Oh, this," Jaguda said lightly. "I bought it from a trader in another town." But Babatunde did not look convinced. His eyes remained fixed on the robe. "That cannot be true," he said slowly, "because this looks exactly like the one my father was buried with." For a moment, Jaguda said nothing. The air between them felt suddenly heavy. Then Babatunde shook his head in frustration and turned away. Without saying another word, he began walking quickly out of the gathering. His mind was racing. If what he suspected was true, there was only one place that could confirm it: the graveyard. Babatunde hurried down the narrow path leading out of the town and toward the place where his father had been laid to rest. The sun was already setting when he reached the graveyard. Breathing heavily, he searched among the graves until he found the mound where his father had been buried. Several weeks had passed since the burial, and fresh grass had already begun to grow over the mound. The soil looked almost the same as the other graves around it. Babatunde knelt down and stared at it for a long time. He searched for any sign that the grave had been disturbed, but the growing grass and hardened soil made it almost impossible to tell. Still, the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to disappear. Something was wrong, very wrong, and Jaguda was at the center of it. As months passed, Jaguda, the man who cried louder than anyone at funerals, slowly became a wealthy man. No one could explain how. He began wearing expensive clothes. Sometimes he appeared in shining agbada robes embroidered with fine patterns and polished shoes that few people in that town could afford. Yet, despite his growing wealth, Jaguda never stopped attending funerals. He still arrived early. He still cried louder than the bereaved. He still offered to carry the coffin. He still insisted on digging the grave himself. Sometimes people would watch him digging the earth while dressed in clothing far too expensive for such dirty work. People shook their heads in admiration. "Look at Jaguda," some whispered. "A wealthy man, yet so humble." But Jaguda's heart was not humble. Every grave he dug was not an act of kindness. It was an investment. Not long after, an old man named Pa Edward died. Life had never been kind to Pa Edward. He had 3 children living in big cities, but none of them cared for him. The old man spent his final years hungry, bitter, and often alone. Many villagers had helped him from time to time, but his own children rarely returned home. When the news of his death reached them, the 3 children suddenly appeared in the town, and they arrived with money. They announced that their father would receive a grand burial ceremony. 5 cows would be slaughtered. Music would play all night. People would eat and celebrate. The community people watched with anger and disbelief. When the old man was alive, they ignored him, but now that he is dead, they want to show wealth. As if that was not enough, the children brought an expensive coffin. They dressed the dead man in fine clothing. Then they placed golden rings on his fingers and a heavy chain around his neck. Word of this spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. And when Jaguda heard the news, he smiled quietly to himself. Without wasting time, he rushed toward Pa Edward's house. By the time Jaguda arrived, people had already begun gathering. The moment he entered the compound, he threw himself to the ground dramatically. "Our father is dead," he cried. "Our father is gone." He rolled on the ground in grief, beating his chest and wailing loudly. People rushed to console him. Those who did not know Pa Edward's family well might have believed Jaguda was one of the old man's sons. Even the real children looked surprised at how deeply Jaguda seemed to mourn their father. But while the people danced and the ceremony continued, Jaguda's mind was somewhere else as he sat at a corner close to the event. He had already calculated everything. The gold chain, the rings, the expensive clothing, the coffin, all of it would belong to him once darkness covered the graveyard. Late that night, when the music had stopped and the town finally slept, Jaguda returned to the graveyard. The moon was bright enough to guide his steps. He carried his lantern and digging tool just as he had done many times before. The soil of Pa Edward's grave was still soft. Jaguda walked quickly, exposing the top of the coffin beneath the earth. Soon, the wooden lid appeared. He wiped the dirt away with excitement. "This will be the best one yet," he whispered. He opened the coffin carefully. The lantern light revealed Pa Edward's body inside. The gold chain shone faintly. Jaguda reached inside and quickly removed the chain, then the rings. His eyes glittered with greed. But just as he closed the coffin, covered the area and stepped away from the grave, something cold touched his ankle. Jaguda froze. Slowly, he looked down. A cold, pale hand burst through the loose soil and clamped tightly around his leg. And it was gripping his leg. Jaguda screamed. He tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, and even when the hand vanished, Jaguda could not move an inch. He tried, he cried, he pleaded, but he couldn't move his legs. Suddenly, shapes began to appear in the darkness around him, shadowy figures rising from the graves. Voices whispered through the wind. The spirits of the disturbed dead had come. Invisible lashes struck Jaguda again and again. He screamed and fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he cried. He threw the stolen jewelry onto the ground, but the punishment did not stop. All night long, Jaguda screamed, begged and wept as unseen forces struck him again and again. He could not run. He could not escape, and the dead would not let him go. At dawn, people passing near the graveyard noticed something strange. A man knelt among the graves. His clothes were torn, his body covered in dust, his eyes wide with terror. It was Jaguda. Around him on the ground lay gold rings, chains, and other stolen valuables. The people slowly began to understand the terrible truth. Jaguda, the man who cried at every funeral, was the one robbing the dead. But Jaguda no longer seemed aware of them. His mind had already broken. Suddenly, he screamed and began running. He ran wildly through the community, laughing, crying, shouting at things no one else could see. From that day onward, Jaguda wandered the roads like a madman, talking to invisible figures, running from shadows, and one day he disappeared completely. No one ever saw him again, but the community people never forgot the lesson. Those who steal from the dead may never escape the hands of the grave.